methods for inspiration, methods for how to inspire leaders that are doing it for the right reasons, that are doing it for, I guess, the common good as well as their own good. Um,
No, like
and how,
it's
so how do
not
we do?
I wouldn't say it's a problem that it also benefits them, because of course
Yeah,
like you're like living your best life, like whatever it is benefiting you greatly personally. It's just
right.
that it at least has to be the win-win type of thing, that you're
Yes.
not
Okay.
trying to
Yeah.
live your dream at the expense of everybody else. It has to be like, yeah, I will improve my station, so even ambitious people, personally ambitious people, would find that inspiring.
Yeah.
But by that, I will also help everybody else. That's like the win-win scenario as opposed to zero-sum game mentality.
That makes sense to me. Now, I think that in itself is probably the biggest evolutionary jump forward that we're able to make here with the dawn of the internet, with the dawn of these international communications, with the dawn of understanding that the whole world is connected now, and that we have so many opportunities to share with each other and teach each other and inspire each other, that we can really just focus on the win-win. And if we narrow in on all win-win situations and start kind of putting this stigma or this bad connotation to any win-lose situations whatsoever, anything with a win-lose is essentially evil in some ways, or essentially bad, because yeah, you're winning, but you're also knocking someone else down, which means that that person is now your enemy, and they might come back to bite you later, and all the karma that comes from knocking someone down. It's bad stuff. So if we can just kind of inspire that concept in essentially everyone in the world
Yeah,
to aspire to follow great leaders that are focused on these win-win
or
situations,
become
I
great
think
leaders. It's, again, like the
become great
emphasis on,
leaders.
follow. I maybe it shouldn't
Yeah.
be more than 50-50 with inspiring to becoming the leader yourself, because it's not really
Yes.
supposed to be like about creating followers really in mass. It's about more
Okay.
creating
Do
leaders. Is the idea, I think.
do you believe that everyone in the world can or should be a leader, or do you believe some people are just inherently better at being a follower versus a leader?
Well, yes and no, as I would always answer every question generally, but specifically, it's yes, there are people who have personality, temperament that's more geared toward serving than leading. Even though, of course, by leading you can also serve, so there are like loopholes for that.
Yeah.
Which is how I think that's how a person with the psychology of more like a serving psychology can become a leader if the leader is a servant. That's still that makes sense in that sense. Then of course there's the whole thing like what is leading, what is being a leader, and like yeah, not everybody can become the same kind of leader or leader at the same thing, because there are different people
Okay.
with different goals and different psychologies, and there is a group of people who are more inclined towards being leaders. So it's like if you just create any bell curve as usual, you would have like a distribution of like, yeah, some are extremely don't want to lead, want to serve, some extremely want to
Mhm.
lead, never want to serve, and then like sort of most people somewhere probably in the middle or undecided type thing is like almost guaranteed to be the case always, and
That
with
makes
the
sense.
extremes being minorities. So that's like, but the extremes. But in terms of like leaders, like you can be whatever it is that you in your life have capacity to be good at, which I think
Right.
everybody has a capacity to be good at something for like somebody else for some purpose, even if it's not
Mhm.
like for them individually to improve themselves. It's just like somebody, even in terms of like serving, like the reason why I think evolutionarily humanity is divided that way is that if everybody wanted to be just like a leader and never to serve anyone or anything else, then it's sort of it diffuses the society. It's sort of it's
Right.
to I always forget the difference between centrifugal and centripetal, but it's like the motion that flies, everything flies from the center
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
If everybody was like just wanted to be following and or serving and not have the capacity to lead, then it's sort of just the ability of humans, of humanity, or to achieve improvement or great things would be greatly diminished. It would be very conservative and stable. So in this sense, it's just a question of like for people to figure out like where they can achieve excellence. And the
Right.
excellence doesn't have to be of like what you would conventionally think of like high intelligence or like a lot of making a lot of money or like becoming like a leader of a corporation. It doesn't have to be any conventional idea of what excellence should mean. It could be a very individual idea of like being a great carer, like being
Right.
great at like a nurse caring for people. That's still
I
something
think
that you can
it's
adopt as like your way of being the best at.
Yeah, I think it's really good. I think I like the way you said it, and I think it's really good to think of it as just a sphere of influence type of leader, where everybody has their sphere of influence that they're able to lead from, and then they have bigger spheres that they might have parts of that they, might lead part of or they might follow in. So if you think of the whole world as just a million different spheres of influence, and every single person has a role to play in each sphere, and that's kind of a good way of thinking of it, that we're all leaders and followers in many different ways. So I like that. That's
because I
so
think
again, yeah, go ahead.
the real problem is when people fall into just pure follower mode, where they like on every level just expect to be told by like what to think, what to do, what to say,
Yeah.
and they don't sort of exercise their own agency or individuality, or they have no intention to grow. Because I think like the growth is really the like key underlining connecting principle in the world, as I can observe it, is that like generally like what most people would agree, or in any objective sense what you can determine is like a greater or more excellent person, or more just beneficial, constructive use, like however you want, like whatever good thing you want to slap onto it. It generally would be a person who's decided to undergo growth and stick to it, and then they somehow became like a higher achiever or deeper thinker or more emotionally aware or something, like in whatever capacity, like because there's the trajectory of personal growth. It's why they had constructive influence or have achieved great things that like are then beneficial for the rest of society.
Okay, so I think it's definitely safe to say, all those things being said, that we definitely want to inspire all 7.8 billion of us to be leaders, in some fashion, and to try to be better leaders in whatever sphere we're able to control. So I like that. That's really cool when you think of it from that perspective, that everybody should be a leader. We all should try our best to be the most inspired and the best leaders we can be in whatever function we happen to be good at or we happen to enjoy.
Because like the alternatives are like either a person who doesn't realize who they are at all, and that doesn't seem to be defensible as a great thing, and realize in terms of thinking who they are, or realize the potential that they have, or just that seems like one of the easier things to argue for is not a great outcome for a person, or people who do achieve great capacities, but who then specifically decide to use them only, again, zero-sum, benefit only themselves at the expense of everybody else, and not to like give the best of themselves to the rest of the world to benefit.
Okay, so let's change gears for a sec here then. So if our goal is to inspire as many leaders as possible to do great things and better things and progressively wonderful things, then first of all, we have to kind of make sure that their base needs, I guess, are met first. Because the argument is that so many people in the world, maybe 50 to 80% of them are just getting by. They don't really have any time to progress much. They're basically just living day to day, just putting food on the table or paying the bills, whatever it might be, paycheck to paycheck, let's just call it, where they're really not progressing as much as they could be, let's just say. So in order to try to make a world where we can inspire more leaders and give people the time and ability and opportunity to become more leaders, what do you think is some of the best things that we can do to alleviate or at least meet those base needs so that we can aspire to greater things?
Yeah, I think that the key issue is because like there's, of course, again, an evolutionary psychology based reason why people have that selfish mode, and that's that it is survival mode. It's like there are situations in which it is zero sum because like the resources have really run out and it's life or death, and at that point you have to choose survival, and that's the situation in which the sort of ability to just do whatever you need to do to survive is a necessary capacity for human beings to have. It's just the problem is when people keep clinging to that beyond the point where it's necessary. And also a problem is exactly like you say, when you have a lot of people in the world who are forced to be in that state continuously, because like that's not just like limiting them, but of course you're denying yourself and the rest of the world from getting whatever great potential they could have realized. I guess the argument that is being used often is that imagine if all those people could get through education. Like we have some like quibbles with like how education is done, but it's still like not having any capacity to learn with like help from the system at all is probably bad. So if you have that, like just extra billion of people, had that, then you have so much more human capital, if you want to use, again, a useful practical term, where they would be scientists and doctors and artists and whatever support function, even just like productive workers. It's just like you can, whatever good you think a person can produce, they can't produce it if they're stuck in just like a survival mode where they are just focused on living like food and water and shelter, and are just don't have a moment to consider anything else. So that's in terms of how to alleviate it. I think that's actually is a question of economy. Or economics. Okay. That's not something that like individual people can probably solve through wishing or just like working on themselves real hard, because like those people in that situation, no matter how much they would want to like really what's the term, the like really offensive term that American Republicans keep using, like pull themselves by their own bootstraps or something.
Bootstraps, yeah, pull themselves up. But you teach people best by putting them in adversity and letting them grow from the adversity, right? Letting them and seeing the people that pull themselves up, from the adversity, they become stronger people because of it.
From the silver spoons of their parents. It's in this case, like, I think what I especially find annoying about that is like, because I've known debaters like that. And what they do is like there's a core to the argument that's fine, but they're just misapplying or misusing it unfairly to situations where it does no longer apply, and they like really know it and they don't care. Because they just want to win the point, because somebody will say, yeah, that argument is on some basic level reasonable, and wouldn't be able to understand the nuance why it isn't applicable in that case. So like adversity, like again, depends on how you define it. Like, of course, like in order to grow, like I said, some measure of what can be perceived as suffering is inevitable logically, because you're pushing against some sort of pressure. And the pressure, like, I think is better word than adversity. Like people need to be, but that's the thing. It doesn't have to be systemic pressure. Like a person in their own life can find the pressure that they want to struggle against for themselves, which could be personal. It doesn't have to be systemic, is one thing. And there's a difference between the constructive pressure and destructive, adversity, in a sense of like, you force them to be like to have to deal with just basic survival all the time, because that's a strategy of political control over them, so that they don't get any agency of their own. And that's just like if you're like really struggling for systemic reasons, you're really struggling to just get food on the table, then that's a situation in which it's incredibly difficult. Like there are examples of like people who overcome any kind of pressure, but like that's such a high pressure that you can't blame people who fail to overcome it, because it's been put into place systemically to make sure that those people are not able to grow to become a threat politically for whoever's exerting that control. So that to me is completely indefensible. So one of the things you can definitely do, which some progressive people in the United States, for example, are trying to do, because United States, it's hilarious. They like the richest country ever that's ever existed. They can, whatever they would want to do, they can do. It's like literally only about politics, in that whatever is bad in the United States is because somebody in politics wants it to be. It's there you can make arguments for various places on earth where it will be much more difficult, because they don't have the capital to just decide on a dime, turn into a society that has all the services that empower people. It's just like not so easy in other like really impoverished places on the planet. There probably somebody like European Union or United States would have to help them in some fashion to build them up a little bit before they can like start running on their own. But in the United States, if they like wanted to have universal healthcare, they could have it, so that people don't have to worry that they will get broke when they get sick, which is one of those like adversities that's really unnecessarily extreme, because like it's and unnecessary even in that sense that like everywhere on the like developed world, like everywhere else, they just have universal healthcare, and there was no collapse or like people stopped like being ambitious or whatever. It's just like it like hasn't happened, hasn't had any, it has only had positive like upsides, not negative downsides. So that's one thing. Then, of course, they could decide that all the money that they used like to just go to war to create more impoverished people who have to fight for survival, they just didn't have to do that at all. And then those people just wouldn't also have the country war-torn, in addition to just not being that well off from to start. So that's like how you don't have to actively make things work. That's like first thing you can do. Stop actively creating more people who are in those dire situations. Then like look at your system, and you can definitely do a lot with political reforms, for which you need to get the consensus. That's why like the fake news is the problem, because it's destroying the consensus that could be existing, that would then allow even democracies to solve it politically in the mainstream way. So, because there were, of course, periods in time where there was constructive reform, even United States multiple times, there's usually some sort of political situation that like creates like the right circumstances to make like New Deal or something of that kind.
Absolutely.
So
again, Sorry, go ahead, finish.
So just to finish the idea. So you actively stop destroying more of the world. So that's like number one. Then you save a lot of money that you then use to invest into fixing, like creating the systems of support that you totally can create, so that people, like, it doesn't have to be any particular version of implementation of it. It's just like, if you do it well enough, then the people are like free enough to then choose the pressures that they want to struggle against on their own, which then will result in more and more people becoming more developed people, which then will create new goods and markets and all the other things that then like further lift up your society and increase your ability to like make even more people, like even then in developed countries or somewhere else in the world, then like to help even them escape the life or death survival mode. And then again, just because more and more, it's sort of it's like the opposite of a vicious cycle. It's the kind of
positive feedback.
Yeah, positive feedback loop is what that then becomes.
Yeah, I really like that. That's, I 100% agree. I definitely think that the more money we can redirect from any kind of win-lose situation, like war is a very classic win-lose situation. There's really no way any kind of violence or war can ever be win-win, right? So it's back to our initial point of redirecting as much resources as possible from win-lose situations and investing it into win-win situations. I think that's a very basic way we can kind of get it out there. Is this a win-win situation? Is it a win-lose? Usually it's pretty obvious. And if we can just get more of our leaders, more of our politicians to think like that, I think that would be a great step forward. If we were leaders of the world, and I love asking everyone this question, if you were in charge of everything, if you were the emperor of the world, what would you do to make things better? What kind of rules or laws or programs would you implement? Most people think, I would just quit. I can't do that. It's too much responsibility. But I was like, no, you don't have an option. God himself has put you in charge. You either choose to do your best with it, or the whole world blows up and we all die together. So do your best. Just don't try to cop out. And I just really like posing that question to everybody, and anyone who ever sees this, just take some time and think about what you would do if you were in charge of everything. And just by thinking about that from the win-win situation, I think the world could just be so much better, and we can kind of get that baseline for everybody on what is the optimal level to start with. Where, especially with with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, how high do we want everyone in the world, all 8 billion of us, or 7.9 billion, what is the base level that we all should strive to be at, so that we can all inspire each other to be better leaders? Right? What is enough? What is enough is a good question.
Yeah, because I think it's sort of a kind of a weird person to ask that kind of question is somebody like I personally am, politically speaking, like a humanist, of course, but that means also kind of an anarchist, in the sense of like a philosophical anarchist, not like a throwing bricks at McDonald's anarchist, which is a caricature essentially of what that movement is about. And a good example of like how that sort of can be really interesting is like just yesterday I've mentioned Urza, which is the Czech sort of libertarian anarchist person. And just yesterday I realized he has a political party that's because we have upcoming elections in Czech Republic. But the whole thing is he doesn't want anybody to give them any votes. He only did that because that gives him a platform based on our law where he gets some space in the media, because he's running as a political party to be able to spread his message. And his message is that they don't want to get any votes, and if they somehow got enough votes to get there, they would just abdicate the mandate that they got.
Right.
And that's something that's does not compute to like Czech political people, which is hilarious to watch interviews then, because I've seen the interview of the same person who on Czech television which is like a BBC. It's like a public service. So they have to interview all of the running candidates. So the person on the news channel was just asking him the standard questions, but then was like getting visibly more and more frustrated. And just not comprehending the answers, because like essentially to every question, like what should state do? Like every answer was like, yeah, I don't think state should do anything. So it was like just like saying no to all of the it's like anybody like in an organized fashion solving to collectively on the basis of like democratic thing, solving anything was like always like just leave it to the individual people and their mutual agreement between each other in every instance. Essentially answer every time. So if you ask that person like what would you do as the emperor of the earth, is like no, there's just like there shouldn't be. I would make it so that there is no emperor of the earth. Is essentially like what he would say. So it's sort of a whole philosophy that still is like a part of humanistic vein of philosophy, because in humanism it's not supposed to be like there's an enlightened monarch that has the right to decide for other people what they should be doing. So this is sort of like a whole problem with this concept of power. But in this vein, like what does it mean? We'd say like, what would you do if you could do anything to change the world? Would be more about like removing problematic structures than adding new structures. Because
Yeah, it's a good point. So when I asked that question, I 100% agree that I don't think there should be one person in charge. Obviously, I'm a democratically type person where everybody should have a say. We all should kind of vote on policies. Ideally, every single law, as long as you're educated enough, everyone in the world should be able to vote on it. I mean, we have the internet now. It wouldn't be that hard to do that. Like in the old days, it made more sense to elect representatives because, you just couldn't get 50,000 people to vote on one law very easily, right? But now you can. Like anybody who's, maybe you have to do maybe an hour course and read something to make sure you're actually educated enough to vote on something, perhaps, because you don't want people just randomly voting, without really knowing, or voting, brainwashed type of voting where they might be, controlled. And then it just becomes kind of a media frenzy, a little bit of trying to gather votes for whatever. But if you're informed at least a minimal amount, you should be able to vote on just about any law or policy, from a worldwide, if you think of a worldwide government, you could easily run it that way. I think Elon Musk has talked about running the government of Mars that way, perhaps with some kind of just full representation. Anybody who wants to vote on any specific issue has the ability to, and every vote counts.
It will be a small community, so there's every reason why a small community can be self-governed using complete direct democracy. That's not problematic from political science point of view, because I can give you like sort of political science highlights of like how political science thinkers think about this system types, and the general issue is that one of the issues, especially historically, was like the people can't necessarily make it their job, or wouldn't want to make it their job, to constantly make choices politically. Right. So one of the reasons for representation is that you're delegating this capacity to somebody who is a dedicated professional, who is supposed to be a competent, dedicated professional, who is then like on your behalf is supposed to be able to make stuff, which in the sort of there's the whole whole sort of streak of e-government type solutions, which are sort of emerging and haven't been really implemented too much. But we have been discussing them when I was in university, at the university in political science courses a little bit, because already then it was obvious that maybe it's heading that way. And so you can definitely have like the person voting on your behalf in the future could be some sort of AI that is like your client, in the sense of like computer client type of software. Where you could be like select whenever you want to do that. You could select your preferences, for instance. Like you could have like a portfolio of preferences where you would select generally on like where you stand on issues, and then the AI could be doing the voting all the time for everything for you on the basis of your preferences that you've set up in once in that like the system, that you don't have to constantly be changing or clicking voting all the time. So then the issues there are with like any electronic form of government that are more like a security, like hackability of the solution is generally the issue, not that it wouldn't be hella convenient to be able to do that, and or that it wouldn't allow you to have a more of a direct democracy thing. So for me, it would make sense, because people are doing a lot of the times polls anyway, trying to know the preferences. It wouldn't be that much of a stretch to like for every person to have some sort of like a profile where they would have just like posted their general preferences, which then like various like algorithms on the internet could be searching for to understand where everybody's at at the moment, even if technically it was still a representative model or more or less, it would still be able to have more of a direct, detailed feedback. And so far, like even if people don't do this, I think the issue is like currently people are not doing it voluntarily, openly, but you still have algorithms who try to figure exactly that out from data, from metadata of like people just doing their stuff, like what they're buying, what they're watching and stuff. And there are people who just try to have an algorithm to figure that out. If you like brought it into the open and made it like people actually post openly what their preferences are, or openly. It doesn't have to be like openly that person, like every person can search it, but there could be like an institution that can use this to inform itself for like statistical purposes. And then like what everybody would be able to see is the overall statistic. So that's like I can imagine maybe you can definitely create, and maybe that's the way it's headed, this kind of thing. So I definitely see it as like a shift toward it is definitely happening because the technology is enabling it. It's just like it's not extremely completely simple in implementation. There are some new risks involved with that.
For sure, yeah, and it'll be a slow, gradual change if any change comes. But it's interesting, I think, to at least pose the questions to people. What would you do if you had a say in whatever it might be? And I think just the more participative we are in all these, at least the bigger decisions, climate change and poverty, and how would you deal with, the basic things. You may not be able to get into the weeds on some of it without, a lot of study or a lot of time, and we all can't be experts on everything, obviously. But I think it's definitely important to think about the bigger picture. And I think the more that we can kind of use critical thinking skills and just basic argumentative skills on what the bare minimum should be for for how people live, right? What should we expect from people? How do we deal with these big problems of poverty and climate change?
Yeah, like I think just in the history of politics, the evolution is like the trend that this is following is that like in the first democracies on record, in Athenian democracy, the people who could be doing this like all the time actually try to be informed, have discussions, and be like public, doing public discourse, being like actually having a public sphere with citizens actively in it, which is a functional model mostly. Is that the issue was that they had slaves then in the society who were doing all the menial tasks, and so the majority of people wasn't involved in that process at all because they didn't have the same citizen status, and those were the people who were doing the hard labor and stuff that makes you not want to have to think about all the extra stuff. Yeah. So today I can see that totally becoming much more of a thing if we move more into automation, especially for all the like hard manual labor or like difficult jobs of that sort. And then most people will be like technically unemployed, but like will be some sort of universal basic income type situation. This is exactly the thing that I can see that many more people will then try to spend their time doing. So this I think has a lot to do with freeing people from having to be doing like menial labor all the time. Like if you like free them from drudgery, that's when they can be expected to be like want to start to be involved in becoming like actual citizens in building a real public discourse.
Yeah. So here's an idea. So I kind of think this very similar to what we talked about with the fake news, as far as choosing, arbiters of truth. Where you use a very select. Eventually, maybe 1% of the population would be arbiters of truth, where that's their full-time career. They're people passionate about finding truth. They're people who are, again, unbiased and uncorruptible as much as possible. Checks and balances in place. So you could do something very similar for the representatives and political sphere, where you're trying to elect, again, maybe as many as 1%, 1 out of every 100 people, because we all have more time to do everything. 1 out of 100 might actually want to spend their time focusing on issues, political issues, and voting for laws that make the world better.
Yeah, I think that there must be. I'm blanking on like who did it specifically, but there are some proposals for like more like you say like this like more of a delegative like more levels of delegation. That are not necessarily just formalized elections with just the electorate and people who are elected and are the members, but that you could have like just could be like delegating to whomever you want. And there could be like multiple layers of people who then are more involved in making the political decisions informed. I
love the idea of kind of being organized into communities, right? Where you might have a community of 10 families, and then that community has one representative that goes into the community of 100 families, and then that 100 families chooses one representative, and it could change every month or every year, as often as that community wants to change their representative. And it keeps on kind of going up until you get to the top level of 100 representatives for all the nations of the world. And it, again, if it's constantly fluid and changing, if someone's doing a great job and you appreciate them because you actually know them, everyone at that level can kind of know them on a personal level, and and know whether they're hopefully know whether they're being corrupted or not to some extent, as long as, again, as you have transparency enough to kind of root out the corruption, hopefully, at every level, right? But if you just kind of go up hierarchically, I think that could be a definitely great step forward from a political standpoint. Because right now, each representative represents maybe 100,000 people on average, which is just too much to really know that person. Most of the people don't even know who they're voting for.
It's too much distance between between the levels.
Yeah, so say each 10 families voted on one person, and then that one person voted for all the 10 families for the next level, and then that one person voted in the next level. That way it just kind of keeps going up.
Yeah, I think
your sphere of knowledge gets smaller.
I think I'm sort of vaguely remembering that this must have come up during some sort of e-democracy lecture or something, because like that's sort of, again, enabled by the new technologies, where you can have even, like you say, dynamically shifting balance of this. Whereas it's not like everybody who's like an elected representative has a fixed term necessarily. It's just like maybe you could have like at the tippy top level or something, but throughout like that it wouldn't even be so fixed. Like it has to be like 10 families have to have one. It's just like left to like sort of spontaneous self-organization, because like that's people who like it, I think, are in the camp of like who are mostly for like market should sort things out. So it's like the sort of that any centralized planning or too formalized system is problematic because it's rigid, inflexible, and it's not actually reflecting the dynamic situation the best. So that's why you should generally prefer systems which have this element of flexibility and adaptability.
It would be interesting is if you could actually just give someone else, anyone you wanted, the power to vote for you. So you never had to worry about voting again, maybe. And especially if elections happen a lot more often. Say you had an election every month for a certain act or certain law.
That's mainly the case. Like if it was like supposed to be much more frequent, that's when you need this.
Yeah, if it was supposed to be more frequent. And then you could basically just say, I trust this person. I know him personally. I trust him to make the best vote for me, so I don't have to worry about it anymore. It's an interesting way of thinking about it. I'm giving my democratic power to this person, and I can take it away whenever I want. But if I want to focus on my art, or I want to focus on my sports or other stuff, I don't necessarily want to focus on the politics. But I trust this person enough to vote for me.
I think there's just an issue. People would argue there's some potential for abuse of this. But again, that depends on the general situation in your society. Like if you are some sort of Western European Union country, I think there's a fairly little chance of that turning really bad. And at the same time, if you have something like, I don't know, Russia, it's just like no matter what you formally say the system does, the issues will still be there, because the issues are not about systemic settings. The issue are about like the sort of political reality that's currently existing there. So there's a limit to how much just a systemic setup can affect the outcome, because ultimately, I think that's sort of what was proven. And one of my sort of pet peeves with the political scientists at Masaryk University in Brno, they decided that the sort of empirically analytical approach, so-called, is the ideal one when we try to analyze the systemic features and tweak the systemic features to achieve some sort of improvement of outcomes. But they were sort of failed to prove that it matters too much. It seems that the systems don't share commonalities in outcomes based on commonalities in systems, which indicates that the system setting is not the driving force of the outcome. So it's really then like who would step in are the like political realists who would try to explain the sort of reality of power relations between the people who live in that country at that moment, which dictates things like, okay, will we follow the rules that exist, or will we be circumventing them? Like one of the dishes, because like just because you have formally declared that you have some systemic rules, it doesn't predetermine like to how much they will be followed. Because like I think many people said that with Trump, that like Trump was saying all the wrong things that should have disqualified him, but somehow people like at large, the public at large, decided it's not disqualifying. So then, like, you could be like screaming, like following, like calling, like pointing back to the rules, but that's against the rules that previously made politicians be fired. But like the sort of the status quo, like the sort of public opinion was what was driving what is allowed or what is not allowed. Because just because you have laws doesn't mean, like, first of all, because you have laws doesn't mean that people won't break them. And just like because people are breaking the laws by itself doesn't tell you if people will be okay with it or not. Because then, like, you will only punish people who break the laws if the public thinks you should punish them. Really, otherwise it's just people will be turning a blind eye in the like the security or police or like enforcement of the law.